Okay, for our very last session today, what we wanted to do was have a bit of a panel discussion about project management in government agencies. So my name's Emma Davidson. I'll be the moderator for discussion today. I'm with Agileware. I do some project management for them, and before that, I previously, in like a whole other lifetime ago, was managing projects on the other side in government agencies. So I've kind of got a bit of an idea of both sides. I'd like to introduce you to our panel members today. We have Gavin Tapp here from Acquia, Geoff Dibley here from Prime Minister and Cabinet, Sharyn Clarkson from Finance, and we have Kurt Foster here from Salsa Digital. So I thought I might get started by asking what sort of project management methodologies you're seeing used at the moment in government agencies. Like, are you seeing a lot of Agile, or are they using other methodologies?
We only use Agile.
Yep.
I think you're on. You're good.
Switch it on. Yep.
In our part of finance, we only use Agile now. It's pretty much our dominant way of working. Although we do have some ways of managing programs of Agile projects.
Okay. And has that been a deliberate move to only use Agile, or is that something that's come about organically?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
We are working, though, with lots and lots of agencies who, there's a full range of people who've never ever given it a go, to people who've tried it before and it's failed in their agency, and so they have some reservations about trying it again, to people who are really keen to try it but not really sure how to do it, right through to people who are really gung-ho about giving it a go and who have successfully picked it up straight off the bat. So we see the full range of the teams we work with.
Okay. And is PM&C the same? Are you using Agile methodologies there yet?
We're definitely moving down that path a lot more. It's certainly a lot more of our more recent projects. It's sort of fitted in a lot more with the timeframes and the sort of pressures there to deliver a lot more quickly with some of our projects. So that's certainly been a feature there. A lot of our older ones definitely were more on that waterfall approach, but definitely changing across to more an Agile approach.
Okay. And has that been something that's happened deliberately, or is it just something that's come about as the industry has moved?
I think it's just been a sort of general change that's happened across government gradually. So I don't think it's something that we've deliberately set out to do, but it's just been the nature of the way things have been going and the direction we've been heading gradually. So.
Okay. And how have you had to manage that change process to change from the methodologies you were using to becoming more agile? Does that mean a lot of training required, or?
I think a lot of that's been sort of developed in-house and over time. I guess a lot of that Agile one is developing things that work within your organisation as well. It's not necessarily following a defined sort of process. It's got something that works within your particular organisation is particularly important. That
does sound like one of the key things about Agile, being flexible and going with what works.
Definitely, yeah.
We've talked about that a lot in our team. That while we wanted to adhere to the principles of Agile, we didn't want to follow a book, and we didn't want to have a prescribed methodology that we would follow to the letter. There's some things that we hold as really important, and we would hate not to do, and those are stand-ups and retrospectives. The value of those is so overwhelming. There's things like that, pieces of Agile that we would definitely, we do them every time. But how we work, it's much more attuned to our products and our group and our culture, and we're quite happy to have it to be quite flexible, and it moves quite a bit depending on what we're working on. That's the whole point. I mean, I think the cultural change factor of moving to Agile is often overlooked and not being talked about a great deal in government, but essentially the reason I put government Agile in everywhere I go in government, as I've moved around, is because it just strips away the safety blanket bit of following Prince 2 methodology, where you're running on a whole lot of tick boxes and not a great deal of thinking sometimes. I mean, all of a sudden, I'm telling people, well, you have to think this through. You have to nut it all out and argue about it within your group, you're going to have to argue yourself to the point that you have the agile methodology that works for you, and that's exactly what my team did, and they did argue very, they were great. But it's really important to go through that process because it's reteaching public servants how to think. Not that they couldn't think, but they've been in a culture in which they were encouraged to think. They're encouraged to follow orders and to wait to be instructed. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's been a really bad thing for the service, APS in general. So I think giving people back their confidence and their skills to work things through themselves is really important, and that does change culture.
It does.
Yeah.
Is that something you've noticed? That change?
Well, I mean, Agile is the default for us now, I think, for our government and kind of enterprise clients. I think a big thing I've noticed is it does really require that commitment and that commitment for change from the department and the more senior people in the department. I think I have worked before on, I'm sure other people have worked on the cowboy style of Agile where the department doesn't necessarily want to put forward anyone to be the product owner, and every time something goes wrong they just go, oh, it's Agile. But there are things that are really important when you're trying to do an Agile methodology, and like you were mentioning, the product owner for us is kind of really the most important thing, and knowing that there is someone on, on their side who is going to own that process right the way through.
So you talked about when things go wrong and what happens there. Do you find that risk management is changing to go with the new Agile methodology, or is it still the same process?
For me, I find it's a lot easier to manage risk in an Agile process. The alternative is if you're going with waterfall, it's far too late and you've already invested too much by the time problems arise. Whereas with Agile, you can run a number of proof of concept tasks very early on, find out where your problems are. A lot of the time the product owner will realise that what they've asked for isn't actually what they wanted at all, or that the way that they've expressed it, like the previous speaker just mentioned, the tyre swinging from the tree analogy, the developers just haven't actually understood what was requested because the way it was described wasn't right.
Yeah. How about at Acquia, how do you manage the risk process for these government processes with an Agile methodology?
So we spend a lot of time working with clients before the project starts, and usually the executives and the business area are pretty comfortable with the risks and pretty excited to be seeing proof of concepts earlier and all those things that we talked about that kind of mitigate the risk. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a bit. It's interesting, the thing where it can get a little bit interesting, it's not really a risk so much, but it can be later on in the procurement stage of that contract negotiation or discussion, where you may need to then talk with parts of the organisation that aren't really familiar with Agile, where somebody may want to say, thank you. Excuse me, drinking. So we're spending all this money, tell me exactly what we're getting for that at the end. And that's kind of not what Agile is about. Agile is about saying, well, at some point along the way, if you decide that you're on the wrong track, you can change the track you're on. So is that a risk, or is that like a risk mitigation, I guess? So I think that's been quite interesting, but yeah, I'm not sure how well that answers your question.
Actually, no, it does. So it sounds like you have to do a lot of planning and preparation beforehand to make sure that everyone understands what they're getting into before you actually get started. Is that right?
Yeah, we do a lot of education, and I think working with many government clients, like probably any agency or any vendor in this room and Department of Finance, we're doing a lot of work talking with agencies about Agile and what it means, how it contrasts with some of the things they've traditionally done in their project procurement and delivery.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of education going on.
Right. So I guess this is something that's going to get easier over time as people get educated. The next time you do a project with some of those same key people involved, you'll be able to hit the ground running.
Hope
is
so.
the hope?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that something that you think we're preparing well for in keeping our public servants trained up?
Definitely through our...
Just hold it a bit closer, I think you'll be all right.
I'm really having technology problems at this conference. I think that we have found with our interactions with agencies on GovCMS, that we misunderstood just how much education we would have to do before someone started an agile build of a GovCMS site. And I think we didn't do so well for agencies because we didn't understand how much they would need that before they got going. Now we do, so now we're starting to do things prior to them starting. But it's right, the more opportunities people have to try this out, the easier it is subsequent times or the next time. Interestingly enough, we were the only group within this Department of Finance that was agile, but the results have been so striking that Jane Holton's now really pushing for us to help other areas of the department. So we've now had quite a few internal groups coming to us and learning about service design, user experience design, and learning about agile. And Jane's quite keen for us to do something quite public within the Department of Finance, showcasing an agile build, addressing a problem internally, something process-wise that we can improve. So I think even seeing in something like Department of Finance, and let's face it, that's pretty traditional and crusty. It's more than just the digital team in finance interested in this now. Quite diverse groups within that department are quite interested in trying something new. I think you have to have a little bit of faith and a little bit of courage and have a go sometimes.
Yeah, I think the training aspect's really important, I've found. Sometimes early on in a project, if people don't really understand how user stories works and how to create epics, what is an epic, what is a story, how do I actually express these, these requirements off to developers, it is important that us as the team of developers, project managers, we actually create a few stories in the beginning, walk them through that process, make sure that they understand, and that kind of allows the entire project to flow a lot better.
Yeah, and it's not just about changing the way the documentation's written. It's also that cultural change about the relationships between the team members and who's responsible for what, and how that works.
And
that's right, and also
not missing retrospectives.
Yeah, definitely.
Very full-on look at how you've performed and how you work together as a team. Yeah. I mean, I attribute much of the massive increase in productivity in our group to those retrospectives, just constantly refining and iterating the way we work together, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, even there are retrospectives at the end of a sprint, but even when you're actually creating those stories, you go through a process of estimation. Sometimes developers still don't understand exactly what's required. A lot of time, if people aren't used to Agile, they don't understand that actually it's okay if a story comes back to me. It's okay if I need to go back and rewrite some of the requirements. It's not something that just happens once and you never actually take a look at it again. So that's kind of a training thing. And it's also, that's also kind of mini retrospectives on each ticket, I think.
Yeah, so we use a workflow for our stories before they go to developers. This is probably not that unusual, but there's a cycle they go through, and if at the point before they reach the developers, the technical expert says, actually, there's not sufficient detail here to build this, we just send it back to, not to the backlog, like not to Oblivion, but to the right preceding steps so it can be fleshed out and improved. And we find that's a good way to kind of improve the understanding. So if we've got a new team that's new to Agile, it's a great way to kind of coach them through the process of understanding the role of product owner in that story writing process, which is really important. And I like the idea too of creating some initial stories to kind of give them the breadcrumbs to follow. So long as you are kind of coaching them, you don't want to sort of create this trap for yourself that they don't become the product owner themselves, but that's pretty easy to manage. So long as they know that they own the backlog, they own the things that go into development, that's really key.
Yeah.
So a question that's come through on Twitter from Brian, if you're out here. There you are, hi. So he's wanting to know how you deal with agencies that are asking for a fixed price quote at the tender stage when they're using Agile as their methodology, because Agile and fixed price quotes don't sound like they would naturally fit together that well. But that I guess there is a procurement process that departments have to go through. So I guess how do you deal with it?
We would try to find out more about why there's a fixed budget, and if it's government, whether that's fixed to a like a financial year or some other kind of limit. I mean, the limits, we don't just expect that the government has endless money, because that's not true, but we want to know if that was just money to the end of the financial year and then there was more. And then we'd very quickly want to talk about expectations and saying, well, if you've got this much money, you know, you may not be able to get the Rolls-Royce version. Do you need the Rolls-Royce version? Maybe this is a point where you may need to reconsider your expectations and talk to your executive about something different, either in terms of expectation or in terms of budget or time, or one of those things. But like, there'd be a lot of discussions around that, I think, to sort of try to find something that will fit within their budget. And looking at the MVP products, we've like diagrams we've seen on screen today, to see how much of that MVP we can give them and see if they're flexible on, do they get the whole car with that budget, or do they just get the bicycle? You know, that kind of discussion as well.
And I think it's important from our side of the fence, in terms of when we're engaging these companies, to be realistic as well. You know, we know in terms of dealing with our client areas, and we have the technical capacity to talk between the two. And if someone's wanting the Rolls Royce and the money doesn't match up, then it's pretty clear that there's a disjoint there that we've got to work through. So I think we have a role to play as well in terms of the web teams at the government side as well.
Absolutely. Well, look, I guess if we could finish up by, if I can ask each of you to tell me sort of your top one or two things that you think really help make an agile project in government work. Kurt, would you like to give me one or two things that you think make a big difference?
Something that makes a big difference to me, obviously I'm on the dev team, is the planning poker process. So we use a website called planningpoker.com. A lot of the time that actually helps us make sure our estimations are a lot better, because you've got a few more people involved in the process. But a lot of the time that also highlights issues where I may have thought that I had enough information to go forward with a ticket, but once the other devs get involved and they start raising other questions that I might not have thought of, it makes sure that, okay, at this point, before we go any further, we can send that ticket back again, make sure that, you know, the extra definition gets added, and when that ticket actually starts getting worked on, we know exactly what it is we're doing. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I've got to work out why Agile struggles in government, and I don't think it's just about the procurement question. I think Agile that works in government has to have managers and teams that have high levels of trust. It's a fundamental, it's a culture shift, right? So as an SES officer, I don't go to retrospectives, because I don't want people to change their behaviour or say things because I'm in the room, so I don't go to retrospective. I know what happens in them, I know what issues are found, I know if things are robustly debated, and I know who took responsibility to find a solution. But I don't actually turn up to those meetings. I also don't very often, it'd be very rare that anyone in my team pops out of a sprint room to come and ask me permission to do something. I mean, you're in the sprint, you're in that scrum team, you have the authority to make the decisions in that room. And that's important. The devolved authority to make decisions by the sprint team. So if you're very, if you find that concept difficult as a manager, you need to build really high levels of trust to get the most out of Agile in this way of working. It hasn't let me down yet. Do our products, never ever have a glitch? Of course we have glitches, of course we have things that go wrong sometimes, but I just know that the risks I manage now are far smaller than the risks I used to manage under the waterfall. And I know when things are going wrong, and I know so much earlier, and I can bring my directors and myself, with all the experience that we have over many years, we can quite often avert disaster just from that wealth of experience. But we can't when it's too far down the track. And the thing is, with Agile, we never get far down the track without finding these things out. It's just a whole lot better way of operating. I'll never go back. I don't think my team, they're here. You want to go back? Waterfall? I don't think we find very many. Yeah.
How about you, Geoff?
I think it's about having the right team and having those right dynamics and giving them the right authority to do what they need to do. I think examples of two particular projects that went different ways, and in our organisation. And I think one of them was because there wasn't clear lines of accountability, there wasn't a clear team structure, there weren't clear team roles. It made it very difficult for that project, and yet the other project with a clearly defined team, clearly working together, good dynamics, good responsibility and the like, and the outcome was very different. So I think that's one of the key things.
Yeah, so it's the people that make the project.
Definitely.
Yeah. Gavin?
I was going to say trust and then relationship, but they've both been taken. So I'd say the other thing would be to agree at the start of your project or at the right time what rituals you're going to have as part of your sprints, as part of your project, and stick with them, because I think they contribute to the trust and the relationship as well, and you can sort of build that team dynamic over time. So you may decide you don't need to, well, pick the rhythm that is right for your team and your organisation, but I think you need to sort of stick with them so everyone has an opportunity to, air their grievances at the right point or talk about how things should have been done, and to, really give good feedback on what happened in the project.
Okay, great. Well, look, we are running very close to time, so I think what I'll do is I'll say thank you very much to our panellists for coming up here and sharing your experience with us, and thank you to all of you for coming in for this session, and I will hand over to Chris.